He wanted me to keep quiet, but once I learned the truth, there was no going back. I grew up believing my family was solid, unshakable, and maybe even a little boring. My dad was the kind of man everyone admired, hardworking, funny in his own quiet way, the guy who never missed a school play or a football game. He wore the same cologne for 20 years, kept his shoes polished, and always told me that honor is the only thing a man truly owns. I worshipped him. I thought I had won the lottery with the father I got. But sometimes, the most stable walls hide the darkest cracks. And I didn't notice them until much later that IT started small, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't seem to belong. There were late nights when he claimed he was working overtime, though he never brought home extra pay. There were sudden trips out of town, explained with vague excuses about clients or old army buddies he needed to catch up with. My mom, trusting as she was, never asked too many questions. She was devoted to him in a way that seemed almost blind, and I guess I inherited that same blind devotion. Then, one night, while scrolling through my social media feed, I stumbled across something that froze me in place, a photo of my dad. But he wasn't with us. He wasn't with Mom. He was at a birthday party, smiling, laughing, holding a little girl in his arms like she was his whole world. A girl who couldn't have been older than 5. That the caption under the picture read, "Happy birthday, Daddy. We love you so much." At first, I thought it had to be some bizarre coincidence. Maybe a distant cousin, maybe a joke. But the man in that picture wasn't just someone who looked like my dad. It was him. The same eyes, the same watch I had saved up to buy him for Father's Day. The same damn smile I had inherited that I in that single moment. My entire childhood, every memory of family dinners, every piece of advice he'd given me, it all twisted into something I couldn't recognize. My dad, the man I thought I knew better than anyone else, had another family. And the worst part? From the look of those photos, it seemed like he'd been living that double life for years that I couldn't sleep that night. I just kept staring at that picture, zooming in, over and over, as if the pixels might reveal some explanation that would make sense of the insanity. The little girl, his daughter, apparently, had his same crooked smile, the same dimple on her left cheek. She wasn't just some random kid he was holding for a photo. She was his, and the woman standing behind them, smiling with her hand on his shoulder, wasn't my mom. She looked younger, stylish, the kind of woman who seemed like she had walked straight out of a lifestyle magazine. Her caption underneath the photo was even worse than the one from the little girl. "So lucky to have you in our lives. Thank you for being the best partner and father we could ask for." Partner. That single word sliced through me like a blade. My dad wasn't just cheating. He was living a whole other existence. A parallel universe where I didn't exist, where my mom was invisible, and where they were his real family that I felt sick, like I'd swallowed glass. Every memory of him tucking me in at night, helping me with homework, telling me I was his pride and joy, all of it suddenly felt like a rehearsed act. I wanted to throw up, to scream, to tear down every family photo in our house because they suddenly felt like lies hanging on the walls. But the most haunting part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the realization that I had no idea how deep this secret went. How long had he been doing this? How many birthdays had he celebrated with her child instead of mine? And worse, how many times had he lied to my mother's face while looking her dead in the eyes? That night, for the first time in my life, I was scared of my own father. Not because he'd hurt me physically, but because I realized I didn't know who he really was. The next morning, the world felt different. I walked into the kitchen, and there he was, my dad, pouring himself a cup of coffee like nothing had happened. He greeted me with his usual "Morning, champ," his voice calm and familiar. But now, every word sounded poisoned that I studied his face carefully. The faint lines around his eyes, the stubble on his chin, the way he moved with the comfort of someone who had nothing to hide. It was terrifying, honestly, because behind that ordinary mask, I now knew, lived a man who was carrying on a second life that I tried to eat breakfast, but every bite of toast stuck in my throat. My mom shuffled into the room a few minutes later, tying her robe and smiling at him the way she always did. She kissed him on the cheek, and he smiled back, whispering something that made her laugh. I wanted to shout, to slam my fist on the table, to scream. "He's lying to you. He has another family." But I didn't. I just sat there, my hands trembling under the table, staring at them like I was watching a play where I already knew the ending. It was like living in a haunted house. Except the ghost was sitting across from me, sipping coffee, pretending to be my father. And that's when it hit me. If I had stumbled across this secret by accident, what else was hiding in plain sight? What other lies had been carefully woven into our family story? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't trust anything anymore. Not his late nights at work, not the business trips, not even the stories he told about his childhood that I cherished as a kid that I excused myself early from the table, mumbling something about homework, but really I just needed to breathe. I locked myself in my room, staring at the phone in my hand. Part of me wanted to call him out right then and there. Another part of me wanted to run to my mom and protect her from the betrayal that was slowly burning me alive. But the scariest thought of all was, what if she already knew? That day, I couldn't focus on anything. My classes blurred together, every word from the teacher sounding muffled and far away. The only thing echoing in my mind was the memory of that Facebook profile, the smiling pictures of my dad with another woman, holding a kid who looked way too much like me to be a coincidence. When I got home, I decided I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof. Not just a screenshot on my phone, but something that could confirm beyond any doubt what my dad was doing. My hands were shaking as I logged back into the fake profile I'd created months ago, originally just to peek at people without them knowing. I typed her name into the search bar again. The woman who was tagged with my dad in those pictures. Her page was open, public enough to scroll through. Post after post, there he was. Sometimes standing next to her, sometimes holding her hand in the background of family barbecues, sometimes smiling awkwardly at what looked like birthday parties for the boy. My stomach flipped every time I saw his face, my face, duplicated in another life I was never supposed to know about. But then I found something worse. A video. It was shaky, filmed at some kind of small celebration. They were singing happy birthday to the kid, and right there, my dad leaned in and kissed the woman on the cheek before helping the boy blow out his candles. The way he held her waist, the way he patted the kid's head, it wasn't casual. It was family that I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. This wasn't just an affair. This was another life. Another family. And it had been going on for years, right under my nose. That night, I couldn't eat dinner. My mom made her usual pasta, and I just sat there, staring at my plate, listening to my dad talk about his long day at work. Every word made my skin crawl. How could he sit there, across from us, pretending nothing was wrong, while somewhere else another kid was calling him dad? I went to bed early, but sleep didn't come. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding. My brain replayed the video over and over, his hand on her waist, his smile, the boy's laugh. I knew then that I couldn't ignore it. I had to dig deeper. I had to know everything, and that decision was the beginning of the storm that would tear my family apart. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My eyes were heavy, my chest felt tight, and my brain wouldn't stop racing. At breakfast, I watched my mom pour coffee for my dad, the same way she always did, 2 sugars, no cream. It was such a normal, familiar scene, but I couldn't shake the thought. Does she know? Has she always known? The idea clawed at me. Maybe she wasn't as clueless as I thought. Maybe she'd seen the late nights, the extra business trips, the strange phone calls he always took in the garage. Maybe she chose to ignore it, to keep the family together. And suddenly, that terrified me even more than the affair itself that I started replaying memories in my head, searching for cracks in the picture-perfect image I'd always had of my parents. I remembered the time my dad missed my birthday dinner because of an emergency meeting. Mom brushed it off, saying he was stressed from work. But was she just covering for him? Another time, I overheard them arguing in the kitchen. I couldn't make out the words, but I heard my mom's voice breaking and my dad's low, angry tone telling her to drop it. At the time, I thought it was about money. Now, I wasn't so sure. Even small things started to stand out. The way she looked away sometimes when his phone buzzed. The tight smile she gave when he came home late. The way she always defended him when I complained about how absent he was. Was she protecting him? Protecting me? Or was she just protecting herself from the truth? That day, I couldn't stop watching her. Every glance, every word, every gesture. I tried to read between the lines, desperate to figure out whether she was blind or complicit. That be why the time my dad left for work that night, I couldn't take it anymore. I opened my laptop, pulled up the video again, and sat there with my finger hovering over the trackpad. I thought about showing her, forcing the truth into the open. But something in me froze. What if she already knew and chose this life anyway? What if I shattered her illusion and destroyed everything she had been clinging to? The fear of her answer kept me silent. But deep down, I knew silence wouldn't last forever. The truth was a ticking bomb, and sooner or later, it was going to blow. That I told myself I wasn't going to get more involved. That the video was already too much. But the more I thought about it, the more restless I became. Every time my dad said he was working late, I felt my skin crawl. Every buzz of his phone, every glance at his watch during dinner, felt like another reminder that he was living a double life. One night, after another awkward dinner where he barely spoke a word before disappearing to his study, I made a decision. If I really wanted the truth, I couldn't just sit around guessing. I had to see it with my own eyes. The next evening, I waited until he left the house with his usual excuse. Gotta check in at the office. My heart hammered as I grabbed my hoodie, slipped on some sneakers, and quietly followed him out the door. I parked my car a few streets away and kept a careful distance. Trailing his familiar black sedan, he didn't drive toward his office. Instead, he headed in the opposite direction, toward a part of town I barely knew. The further we went, the darker my thoughts became. What if he wasn't just having an affair? What if it was something worse? Some kind of secret life none of us could have imagined? After about 20 minutes, he pulled into the parking lot of a small restaurant tucked between a laundromat and a hardware store. I killed my headlights and parked behind a row of cars, low in my seat, my palms sweaty on the steering wheel. And then I saw her. The same woman from the video walked up, her hair pulled into that same neat ponytail. My dad got out of the car, and without hesitation, he leaned in and kissed her like it was the most natural thing in the world. Not furtive, not hesitant. Like this wasn't an affair at all, but a routine. I felt my throat tighten. Watching them laugh together as they walked inside, hand in hand, was somehow worse than the video. This wasn't a mistake or a fling. This was real. This was a second life. For a few minutes, I just sat there, frozen. Every instinct screamed at me to barge in, to call him out, to demand answers. But instead, I pulled out my phone. I took photos. Not one, not two, dozens, making sure there was no denying what I was seeing. My hands shook so badly the images blurred, but I didn't stop until I had proof from every angle. That night, as I drove home alone, the weight of what I had done pressed down on me. I wasn't just a son anymore. I had become a spy in my own family. And now I had evidence that could shatter us all. When I got back home, I sat in my car for almost half an hour before even stepping inside. The photos were still glowing on my phone screen, each one burning into my eyes like a brand I could never erase. Proof. Undeniable proof. Yet instead of relief, I felt sick. As I finally walked into the house, the familiar smell of my mom's cooking hit me. She was in the kitchen humming softly, preparing dinner as if nothing in the world was wrong. And my little sister was sprawled on the living room floor, drawing with her markers, completely absorbed in her little world. It was like stepping into a parallel universe where everything looked normal, but I knew behind the surface, nothing was. I went upstairs to my room, locked the door, and collapsed onto my bed. The weight of the decision ahead of me pressed down like a boulder. Do I show Mom the pictures? Do I tell her what I've seen? Or do I keep this to myself, protecting her from the truth, but rotting from the inside out with the knowledge? The thoughts spun in circles. If I told her, I'd be ripping her world apart. She loved him. Despite the distance that had grown between them, she still set a plate for him at dinner, still called him to say drive safe, still clung to hope that he cared. Showing her the truth would destroy her, and maybe even destroy our family. But if I kept it hidden, wasn't I betraying her too? I would be letting her live in a lie, smiling at him while he sneaked off to that woman. And worse, I'd be carrying the guilt every single day, watching her wonder why things fell off, while I knew exactly why. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their hands intertwined. I heard their laughter. I saw my mother's face in my mind, shattered by the truth. I kept unlocking my phone, scrolling through the photos over and over, as if punishing myself for having them. At one point, I caught my reflection in the dark window and barely recognized myself. I wasn't just a son anymore. I was the gatekeeper of a secret powerful enough to destroy my family. And with every passing minute, the silence felt heavier, as if it was crushing me from the inside. By morning, I knew I couldn't hold this in much longer. The only question left was, When I finally decided to reveal it, would it save my mother from years of lies? Or would it be the very thing that tore our family apart forever? The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed more. More than a few stolen pictures from one night. More than a single encounter that could still, in some twisted way, be explained. If I was going to confront him, or worse, tell my mom, I had to be absolutely certain that I made a plan that I told my mom I was going to stay over at a friend's house to work on a project. But instead, I parked my car near my dad's workplace just as his shift ended. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, heart pounding every time I thought he might spot me. At first, he just drove straight, like he was heading home. My stomach was in knots. I almost convinced myself I was crazy, that maybe what I saw was just a moment of weakness, a misunderstanding. But then, halfway through the drive, he suddenly turned onto a side street I'd never seen him use before. I followed at a distance, headlights off when I could, every muscle tense. My father, the man I once thought I knew better than anyone, was acting like a stranger. He parked outside a small apartment building, and before I could even process it, the same woman from before appeared at the door. This time, there were no doubts. No excuses. He leaned in, kissed her deeply, and they disappeared inside together. I stayed in the car for almost an hour, staring at the front door, waiting for him to come out. My mind kept drifting to my mother at home, probably laying out plates for dinner, expecting him to be working late again. The unfairness of it twisted in my chest until I felt sick. When he finally emerged, he looked happy, relaxed. He kissed her goodbye at the door like a man who had no reason to hide. Then he got in his car and drove back toward our house, like nothing happened, like he hadn't just stabbed my mom in the back. And me? I sat there, frozen, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I had the evidence. I had the truth. But I also had a question burning in my mind. Was I ready to be the one who shattered my family by exposing it? That night, lying in my bed, I couldn't close my eyes. Every time I tried, I saw my mom's face. I imagined her smile when she set the table, the way she always hummed quietly when she cooked, how she still asked my dad if he wanted tea even after decades of marriage. She trusted him so blindly, so completely, and then my mind twisted it. I pictured her finding out. The shock first, then the disbelief. I could almost hear her voice trembling as she'd ask me, "Are you sure? Maybe it's not what it looks like." But I was sure. I had pictures. I had the memory of him holding another woman like she was his entire world. The image kept replaying, her breaking down in tears, her life suddenly divided into before and after. I thought about how her trust, the foundation of our family, would crumble. She'd never look at my dad the same way again. She might never recover. And then I thought about myself. If I told her, would she blame me for destroying her happiness? For bringing her pain she didn't ask for? Sometimes people prefer the lie, even if it's poison, because the truth cuts too deep. That I stared at the ceiling, suffocated by the weight of that choice. I could feel my chest tightening, like I was carrying the secret that could collapse our entire family in an instant. And the worst part? A small, guilty thought crept into my mind. If I stayed silent, if I kept this truth locked inside, everything would stay the same. My mom would keep smiling, my dad would keep pretending, and maybe, just maybe, life would go on. But how long could I live with that lie sitting like a stone in my stomach? The next morning, I decided I couldn't keep carrying this secret in silence. I wasn't ready to break my mom's heart yet, but I also couldn't look at my dad without feeling sick. I needed to see if he even felt a shred of guilt, if behind his calm exterior there was any sign of the truth gnawing at him. So, I sat across from him at breakfast, studying every detail of his face. He looked normal, casual even, reading the news on his phone, sipping his coffee like nothing in the world was wrong. But to me, the image of him holding that woman was burned into my brain, and it made my skin crawl. That I tried to test him, casually steering the conversation into dangerous waters. I asked about his work trips, about the time he spends away from home. I even joked, half laughing, about whether he ever got bored of family life. I thought maybe he'd flinch or stumble over his words. But he didn't. His voice was steady, his answers smooth, like he had been rehearsing them for years. It chilled me. Because in that moment, I realized just how easy lying had become for him. He wasn't slipping. He wasn't nervous. He had built a second life so carefully that he could sit across from his son, look me in the eye, and pretend everything was fine. Inside, my anger boiled hotter. How could he act so normal when everything I knew about him had shattered? Did he feel nothing? No shame, no guilt, no fear of being exposed. And then another thought hit me like a punch. Maybe he assumed I'd never have the courage to say anything. Maybe he thought I'd stay quiet forever, letting him play the perfect husband in front of Mom, while he betrayed her behind her back. That realization planted something dark inside me. A part of me wanted to test him further, push harder, see if I could break through his calm mask. Because if I couldn't, then I knew exactly who he had become, and it terrified me. That night, I couldn't sleep. The thought kept gnawing at me. If my dad was willing to lie so effortlessly to me, how many lies had he fed my mom over the years? How many times had he come home late, invented stories, and smiled through dinner like nothing was wrong? I decided I needed proof, not just for myself, but in case one day I had to show my mom the truth. So I set a trap. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a simple way to test whether his carefully polished mask could crack. The next evening, I told him I'd run into someone from his office at the grocery store. I casually mentioned that they had asked about his last trip, even though I hadn't spoken to anyone. Then I added a detail. I said they had hinted that he wasn't exactly working the whole time. I said it with a smile, pretending like it was a joke, but I watched him like a hawk. For a split second, I saw it. The tiniest flicker of panic in his eyes, so quick most people would have missed it. He laughed it off, asked who it was, tried to act amused. But I could feel it. He was rattled. That small reaction was all I needed. It confirmed that deep down, he knew he was guilty, and the fear of exposure lived right beneath the surface. But instead of relief, I felt something worse. Because now I knew that the man who raised me, who I had once admired, was capable of carrying on this charade without ever intending to stop. He wasn't just making a mistake. He was living a double life, and I was the only one who knew. And that put me in an unbearable position: stay silent and watch my mom continue to live in a lie, or shatter her world by telling her the truth that I spent the next few days carrying a secret so heavy it felt like it was burning a hole in my chest. Every time I sat across from my mom at dinner, watching her smile while asking my dad about his long days at the office, I felt a surge of guilt. She had no idea. She thought she was safe in her marriage, cared for, respected. But I knew better now that I began to notice small details I had never paid attention to before. The way she would carefully fold his shirts fresh from the laundry, humming under her breath. How she saved the best portion of dinner for him, even if she was tired from work herself. The little gestures of loyalty and love that only made the betrayal sting more. And every time, my dad would just play along. He'd nod, smile, answer her questions with half-truths, never flinching. If I hadn't seen the panic in his eyes that night, I might have believed him too. That's when the internal war started on one side. There was the son who wanted to protect his mother from pain, to spare her the heartbreak of knowing the truth. I told myself maybe she didn't need to know, maybe ignorance really was bliss. But on the other side, there was this voice in my head that wouldn't shut up. It kept saying, she deserves better. She deserves honesty. She deserves to know who her husband really is. The more I thought about it, the more unbearable the silence became. It felt like I was becoming my father's accomplice, helping him hide the truth just by keeping my mouth shut. I started planning. I didn't know exactly how I'd do it, whether I'd confront him first or go directly to her. But one thing was clear. The day was coming when I wouldn't be able to keep this secret anymore. And deep down, I knew that when that day arrived, nothing in our family would ever be the same again. The breaking point came faster than I expected. One night, after another tense dinner where my dad pretended everything was normal, I found myself unable to hold it in anymore. My mom had gone upstairs early, saying she was tired, and the silence between me and my dad stretched like a rope ready to snap. I just blurted it out. I told him I knew. I told him about the woman, about the night he panicked when I almost caught him. I told him I wasn't blind, that I had seen the late nights, the lies, the subtle signs he thought no one noticed. For a moment, he froze, his fork halfway to his mouth, eyes wide like a deer in headlights. Then, slowly, he set it down and leaned back, his face shifting into something I'll never forget, a mix of guilt and defiance. Like he couldn't decide whether to apologize or double down on the lie. He asked me if I really understood what I was saying, if I had proof. His voice wasn't calm, It was strained, like he was desperately trying to control the situation but already knew the truth had slipped out of his hands. And I realized something in that moment. He wasn't scared of losing me. He was scared of me telling her. My mom, his wife, the woman who trusted him more than anyone. The air between us was suffocating. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. But I held his stare and made it clear. I couldn't keep his secret forever. He didn't beg. He didn't apologize. He just looked at me with a kind of silent warning, as if to say, if you ruin this, you'll regret it too. That's when I knew the choice wasn't just about telling my mom. It was about deciding what kind of man I wanted to be. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mom's face, trusting, tired, still believing the man she loved was loyal. And then I'd see my dad's face, twisted with that cold warning he gave me. Like I had just stepped into a game I wasn't ready to play. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind running circles. If I told her, I'd be shattering her world, tearing down the image of the family she worked so hard to keep together. But if I stayed silent, I'd be complicit in his betrayal. I'd be carrying a lie that wasn't mine, but heavy enough to crush me. The next morning, I caught myself rehearsing in my head how I'd tell her. I pictured walking into the kitchen, her hands busy making coffee, her hair tied up the way she always wore it in the mornings. I imagined her eyes widening, her lips parting in disbelief as I told her the truth. And then, tears, anger, maybe denial, but then the doubt hit me like a wave. What if she didn't believe me? What if she turned on me instead of him? After all, he had years of trust built with her. I was just her son, and she might think I was exaggerating, misinterpreting, or worse, trying to ruin the family. That I thought about waiting, about gathering undeniable proof, something she couldn't dismiss. But the thought of keeping this secret for even another week made me sick. I felt like every word I spoke to her was tainted by the knowledge I was hiding. That I kept watching her that day, looking for cracks in her smile, signs she already suspected. But she moved around the house as if nothing was wrong, humming while folding laundry, asking me about my day, reminding me to eat. It was like she was living in one world, and I was trapped in another, with the truth burning inside me. It'd be why the end of the day, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep this forever. The question wasn't if I'd tell her. It was when, and whether I'd have the courage to look her in the eyes. When I did, that I finally worked up the courage. My hands were shaking as I sat at the kitchen table, waiting for Mom to come in from the garden. I kept rehearsing the words in my head. Mom, there's something I need to tell you about Dad. Simple, direct, but heavy enough to split the air in two. The back door creaked open, and she stepped in with a basket of vegetables, humming softly. My heart raced. This was it. I opened my mouth, but before I could say a single word, the front door slammed. Dad walked in earlier than usual. His tie was loosened, his face flushed. He looked around and froze when his eyes met mine, as if he knew I was about to do it. The room went quiet. Too quiet. Mom smiled, oblivious, and asked him how his day was. He muttered something, brushing her off, and went straight upstairs without even looking back. But the way he glanced at me, sharp, warning, almost daring me to break the silence, made my blood run cold. Mom frowned, sensing the tension. She turned to me, asking if something was wrong. My throat tightened. The words were there, right on the tip of my tongue, but Dad's footsteps echoing upstairs felt like a threat. And then it got worse. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from an unknown number. I hesitated, then opened it. My heart nearly stopped. It was a photo of Dad. Not just him. Dad with her. The woman. Smiling. Laughing. His arm around her waist. And the caption under it. Careful what you tell your mom. Some secrets are better left buried. My hands went cold. My mom was still standing there, waiting for me to speak, her eyes so full of trust. And I couldn't breathe. Someone out there knew I was about to expose him. Someone was watching me. I sat frozen, staring at the glowing screen like it was a ticking bomb. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might be sick. How could they know? How could anyone possibly know that I was even thinking about telling my mom? Mom noticed my pale face and asked if I was okay. I forced a weak smile, slipped the phone into my pocket, and mumbled something about feeling tired. She didn't push, but her eyes lingered on me, searching for answers I couldn't give. When I got to my room, I locked the door and pulled the phone out again. I zoomed in on the photo. It wasn't just a random shot. It was taken today. Same shirt Dad was wearing when he came home. Same watch on his wrist. Which meant whoever sent it wasn't some stranger, it was someone close enough to be following him. Or following me. My pulse hammered in my ears. Another buzz. Another message. If you tell her, she'll break. Do you want that on your conscience? It was like they were reading my thoughts, knowing exactly which buttons to push. I threw the phone on my bed, pacing the room like a trapped animal. Every scenario spun in my head. Mom crying, Dad raging, me being blamed for tearing the family apart. But one thought wouldn't leave me alone. Who is watching me? Was it Dad himself, trying to scare me silent? Was it her, the other woman, trying to protect her stolen life with him? Or was it someone else entirely? Someone in our circle who knew more than they should? That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps outside my door. Every car passing the window felt like eyes on me. By morning, I wasn't just scared of Dad's secret. I was scared that I had become part of a much bigger, darker game. Once the messages started, the world around me felt suddenly microscopic. Every acquaintance, every neighbor, every casual smile at school or the grocery store became a potential clue. I began to replay recent interactions in my head, hunting for anything I'd missed. The offhand comment from Dad's coworker at the barbecue. The way Aunt Carol had lingered a little too long in the kitchen last month. The neighbor who always seemed to be in the right place at the right time. Nothing felt innocent anymore. My first step was practical. I scrolled back through the photos and messages, looking for metadata, timestamps, anything that could tell me who was there and when. There were subtle signs. A coffee cup pattern in the background that matched a mug I'd seen at my dad's office. A reflection in a window that briefly revealed a silhouette I recognized from a high school reunion photo. A small logo on a tote bag someone in my class carried last week. None of it was proof on its own, but together it formed a spiderweb of coincidences I couldn't ignore. That I started to think about motive. Who would want to scare me into silence? If it was my dad, why not confront me outright? If it was the woman, why threaten me instead of hiding more carefully? The idea that someone else in our circle might be watching both of us felt worse than any single betrayal. It suggested planning, collusion, a network of half-truths built to protect a secret at any cost. That I checked the contacts on my phone. Names, numbers, people I'd trusted without question. I couldn't help but notice patterns. A handful of family friends who always seemed to know more than they let on. One of Dad's colleagues who had an odd amount of overlap with events I later discovered on the woman's social feed. I spent hours cross-referencing dates in my head, matching photographs to weekends, tracing who had been where. It was obsessive and ugly, but it felt necessary. If I was about to blow everything open, I wanted to be sure of my ground. To test my theory, I decided to watch the people closest to me without being detected. I started small, dropping by the cafe where my dad said he'd been on a Saturday, just to see who he chatted with. Sitting in the park across from my mom's bridge club to see if anyone lingered in the parking lot. Casually mentioning events to friends to gauge their reactions. In one conversation, a friend of my dad's made an oddly specific remark about keeping things quiet for everyone's sake. And the way he said it, flippant, almost practiced, set off an alarm at my chest. The feeling of being surveilled morphed into something darker when I noticed an unfamiliar black SUV parked across the street one afternoon. Its windows tinted so dark that they were mirrors. It wasn't the kind of car that showed up in our neighborhood often. When I watched from behind the curtain, the vehicle's driver stayed still, as if waiting. For whom? For Dad to return from a late meeting? For me to leave the house? Whoever was inside wasn't interested in the regular rhythms of our street. They were interested in me. That night, I went through an exhausting list of possibilities. Maybe the woman had friends who were fiercely protective. Maybe Dad had hired someone to keep tabs on the other life he'd built. Maybe one of Mom's acquaintances, fearful of gossip, had decided to intimidate me into silence to preserve the status quo. Each scenario was worse than the last because each implied more people were invested in keeping the lie intact. The paranoia fed on itself. I caught myself checking over my shoulder in class, noticing the way a barista watched me more closely than before, noticing Mom's phone buzzing with messages I couldn't see. I started leaving my room at odd hours, trying to catch any movement outside, trying to see patterns in what used to be the predictable choreography of our small town. But beneath the fear, a new clarity was forming. If there was indeed a network protecting this secret, It meant my actions had consequences beyond our home. Exposing Dad wouldn't just shatter my parents' marriage, it might draw in people I'd never expected, open doors to their private arrangements, and set off a chain reaction of loyalties defending themselves by the end of that week. The evidence felt less like a series of random coincidences and more like a map drawn by someone else's hand. Faces that had once been familiar became actors in a script written without my consent. I realized I had to be smarter. Brash confrontation would no longer do. If people were watching, they were ready to counterpunch. If I wanted to protect my mom and preserve whatever truth I could deliver, I needed a plan that accounted for the possibility of surveillance, betrayal, and alliances. So I began to prepare quietly, learning how to back up photos so they couldn't be remotely deleted, saving copies in places only I could access, and rehearsing how to present the facts in a way that left little room for denials. But more importantly, I started building contingencies, a trusted friend who didn't flirt with gossip and lived 2 towns over, an email address I could use to send evidence anonymously if needed, a folder on a flash drive hidden in a place no one would think to look. And while I did all that, a single thought kept returning like a cold draft in a locked room. Whoever was watching me wasn't just preventing me from speaking, they were testing me, waiting to see how far I'd go. The question was no longer just whether I would tell the truth. It was whether I could survive the fallout. When that truth detonated, I started moving like someone who knew how fragile the moment was. Careful, methodical, never obvious. I kept copies of every photo and screenshot in 3 places. A hidden folder on an encrypted drive, an email draft saved to an account only I had access to, and a tiny flash drive tucked into the lining of an old jacket. It felt ridiculous, like I was preparing for war in the middle of my parents' living room. But the stakes were real. That my friend Marcus agreed to help without asking too many questions. He lived 2 towns over and had a steady job at a print shop, which made him the perfect ally. Reliable, discreet, and not someone who'd gossip. I met him at a diner and handed over the flash drive. His face hardened when he scrolled through the photos, but he didn't say a word, just nodded and asked what I wanted to do. "We give her the truth she can verify," I said, voice low. "Not just accusations. Proof. And we do it in a way that can't be immediately erased or spun into some excuse." Marcus agreed to hold copies and to be present when I told my mom, if I wanted him there. That night, we sat in the booth like conspirators, planning the moment down to the tone of my voice. We picked a time when my dad would be away, early morning, on a day he'd claimed to be at an all-day seminar, and when Mom's phone would be off or out of reach to avoid warning him. But while the plan gave me some control, it didn't stop the fear. Preparing for truth felt like rehearsing a funeral. I imagined Mom's face when she saw the photos, the questions that would follow, the years of small kindnesses that might suddenly become a cruel joke. Still, with each nervous breath, I felt a small relief. I was no longer just a silent observer. I was becoming an agent of truth. The morning we picked was bright and oddly ordinary. Mom was making coffee, the house filled with the ritual warmth of toast, and her low hum. I kept repeating the opening line in my head until it sounded numb. Marcus sat in his car down the street. He said he'd wait there and drive me to a cafe if things went sideways. When I finally told her, the room seemed to shrink. I gave her the flash drive first, the physical object that contained everything I couldn't bear to speak out loud. She looked at it as if it were foreign, as if she couldn't understand how a small stick of plastic could carry such weight. Then I showed her the photos, the videos, the dates. I tried to speak slowly, to let her process each frame. First, she squinted at the screen and said nothing. Then her hand went to her mouth, and she let out a sound that I can only describe now as the sound of someone having the rug pulled out from under them. Her breath hitched, and she stumbled back against the counter. For a moment, I thought she might faint. She didn't faint. She picked up the phone and dialed my dad. In that instant, something in me expected fireworks, a collapse, an immediate confrontation. But what happened was quieter and worse. She asked, simply, "Is this true?" Her voice was steady, the steadiness of someone trying to keep themselves from breaking in front of their child. My dad answered, as if nothing had happened. He denied it first, stumbling over exceptions, then grew colder as my mom pressed. I heard him say something that splintered me. "You always overreact." Then a pause. Then, "Why are you doing this now?" It was full of accusation and bewilderment. The man who had lied through the years trying to make her the unstable one. When the call ended, Mom turned to me. Her eyes were red but focused. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked. It was the first question I had expected and the hardest to answer. I said the truth, that I had feared the consequences, that I had been trying to gather proof to spare her the shock, that I had been terrified of what would come next. Her face broke then into something like grief. But there was also clarity. She picked up the photos again, examined the timestamps, replayed the video. For every denial Dad sent, there was evidence stacked beside it. For the first time since I'd started this, I saw a flicker of resolve in her. She said quietly, "I need time. Not forgiveness, not anger. Time." Once the secret had been handed to her, the house changed. The regular rhythms were there: coffee, mail, small talk, but a tense undercurrent hummed like electricity. Mom didn't confront Dad that night in a public blow-up. Instead, she began making quiet moves I hadn't expected. She started calling old friends, checking bank statements, quietly organizing. It was as if she was building a safety net for herself and for us, preparing for an outcome she refused to be naive about. Dad noticed the change. He grew distant in a different way, not smooth and practiced now, but nervous, as if his cover was thinning. Late one evening, I heard him in his study, murmuring into the phone. He slammed a drawer hard enough that the house shook. He began taking longer drives and became evasive about petty things he used to answer freely. Once, I overheard him ask in a low voice, "Did he go to Marcus?" I realized then that the threat had been understood. He knew I'd given someone else copies. The confrontation happened the week after. It was not the cinematic, yelled daydream I'd imagined. It was a slow unraveling. Mom sat him down at the kitchen table and spoke without shouting, but with a weight that made it clear she had already decided. She told him she had seen everything. She asked for explanations. When none came that made sense, she told him to leave. He packed what he could carry in the early hours, shoving shirts and papers into a duffel like a man gathering excuses. He tried to apologize once as he left, but the words came out hollow. From our front window, I watched him walk to the car, the silhouette of the life I'd known shrinking in the driveway. He looked back once, not at Mom, but at me, and his eyes were hard, unreadable. When the car finally disappeared down the lane, there was a silence that felt both heavy and oddly liberating. Our house was quiet in a way it had never been before, and I felt like someone had reached inside me and pulled a thick, poisonous vine out of my chest. But the relief was complicated. Mom was fragile. She cried for days, sometimes silent and empty, sometimes angry. The consequences we'd feared had arrived anyway. Weeks later, life began to stitch itself back together, in ways both familiar and strange. Mom sold the extra car, opened a separate bank account, and started going to a support group. Marcus helped me file copies of evidence with an attorney in case further legal steps were needed. We moved slowly, one cautious decision at a time. Dad called once, from a number I didn't recognize. He asked for forgiveness in a voice that sounded smaller than the man I remembered. I told him what I felt then, that betrayal had changed him and that some things could not be undone by words. He asked to see us. Mom said she needed time. I understood. I felt anger and a strange, mournful pity. For months, I woke up to the knowledge that families could fracture and still continue to exist, but differently. More honest, though scarred. People in our town spoke in low voices for a while. Some chose sides, some turned away. But slowly, neighbors returned to normal greetings. Mom laughed again in small, shaky bursts. She began to teach a cooking class at the community center, which gave her a purpose beyond the house. I started sleeping better, though the photos and the memory of the messages never fully left me. They were reminders of what I had done, both the harm and the necessary violence of truth. That on a quiet afternoon months later, Mom sat me down and took my hand. She told me, with steady eyes, that she didn't blame me for exposing the truth. She said that the weight I'd carried had been too much for a son to bear alone, and that I had been brave. There was forgiveness there, not instant, not without pain, but real. It was the kind of thing that heals in a slow, durable way. I learned then that truth can wreck the life you know and also rescue the life you deserve. The house was different, so were we. But when I watched Mom fold laundry and hum under her breath, I no longer felt like I was living a double life. We had survived the fracture and, in the painful work of repair, found a fragile, honest new beginning. Thank you for watching this story on True Tales Hub. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next story that we post new tales twice a day, and each one comes with unexpected twists you won't see coming.